Welcome to Nature's Narratives Nook. Get ready to meet a truly bizarre and fascinating creature today, the pangolin.
Oh, definitely. If you haven't heard of them, just try to picture this. It's a mammal, right? But completely covered in scales, like a walking pine cone, sort of.
Exactly. It's such a unique look.
There's really nothing else like it.
And these aren't just, random scales. They're made of keratin.
Yeah, the same stuff as our fingernails and hair. It's wild.
And this is their signature look, right?
Mm-hmm.
Found on all 8 species across tropical Africa and Asia.
Mm-hmm. And those scales, they're basically built-in body armor.
Body armor. How so?
Well, when there's trouble, say a lion comes sniffing around, the pangolin just instantly rolls up.
Into a ball.
A super tight armored ball, completely predator-proof, pretty much.
Wow. Talk about impressive natural defenses.
It really is.
But when it comes to getting food, their weapon is different. It's their tongue, isn't it?
Oh, totally. An incredibly long, sticky tongue. These guys are absolute champions when it comes to eating ants and termites.
How long are we talking?
Well, get this, it can be longer than a third of their entire body length.
No way, that's huge.
It is, and they've got these really strong claws, too, perfect for ripping open insect nests.
So they just scoop them up with the tongue then?
Exactly. But what's really fascinating is despite eating all those crunchy insects, they have no teeth at all.
No teeth. How do they chew?
They don't really. They have strong muscles in their stomach. It works kind of like a bird's gizzard to grind up their food.
Huh, interesting. I read somewhere they can look a bit like tiny dinosaurs.
Huh. I can see that, especially because some species actually walk on their back legs sometimes.
Really? Like a little T-Rex.
Sorta. They usually use all fours, but yeah, some can stand up and walk just on their hind legs, using their tail for balance. It's quite a sight.
Okay, I definitely want to see that.
So yeah, prepare to dive deep with us as we uncover the secrets of these amazing scaly wonders, the serious threats they're up against, and why their story really, really matters.
All right, let's get to know the family a bit better then. You said 8 different kinds.
8 species, yeah. 4 of them live over in Asia.
Okay.
You've got the Indian pangolin, the Chinese pangolin, the Philippine pangolin, that was specific to the Philippines, obviously, and the Sunda pangolin.
And they're all related?
Yep. Their scientific names usually start with the genus Manus. Think of that like their main family name.
Got it. Manus and the other 4.
They're found in Africa. Now, these guys belong to a couple of slightly different but closely related branches. We call them Phyta genus and Smuxia.
Okay.
So within those, you have the tree pangolin, the long-tailed pangolin, the giant pangolin, it really is big, and the Cape pangolin.
Cape pangolin. I think I've heard other names for that one.
You probably have. It's also called Temminck's pangolin, or sometimes just the ground pangolin. And just to make it a bit confusing, sometimes you'll see older books put some of those African ones under Manny's, too. Science is always refining things.
Right. Classifications change. But they all share those key pangolin features.
Absolutely. No teeth, super long, sticky tongues.
Up to a third of their body length, you said.
Yep. And those powerful claws we mentioned, they don't just use them for breaking into termite mounds.
Where else?
Well, the ground-dwelling ones use them to dig burrows. That's where they live.
Oh, okay. So some live in trees, some on the ground.
Exactly. Depends on the species. The tree pangolin, the long-tailed one, they're mostly arboreal up in the trees. Others, like the Cape pangolin or the giant pangolin, stick to the ground and dig tunnels.
And is that digging actually good for anything, besides giving them a home?
It is. It actually helps the environment. Their digging aerates the soil, mixes it up. It's kind of like having little natural gardeners around.
Huh. So they're not just cool looking, they're actually like ecologically important. That's fascinating.
Definitely.
And those scales. Fantastic against lions, you said.
Right. But here's the really sad part. That same defense mechanism, it makes them incredibly vulnerable to humans.
How so?
Because when they get scared, their instinct is just to curl up tight, which means poachers. Well, they can just walk up and pick them up. No chase needed.
Oh, man. That's just awful. A tragic irony.
It really is.
Now, something you hear sometimes is people calling them scaly anteaters. But that's not quite right, is it?
No, not at all. It's a common mistake because, they eat ants and have that sort of armored look, a bit like an armadillo, too.
Right.
But taxonomically, they're not closely related to anteaters or armadillos at all. Pangolins are in their own unique order, Pholidota.
So where do they fit in the animal kingdom?
It's interesting, they're actually more closely related to the Carnivora group.
You mean like lions and dogs and bears?
Exactly. All part of a bigger group called Ferae. The resemblance to anteaters is a classic case of what biologists call convergent evolution.
Convergent evolution.
Mm-hmm.
That's when unrelated animals develop similar features.
Precisely. Because they adapt to similar lifestyles or environments, like how birds and bats both evolved wings for flight, even though they come from very different evolutionary lines. Pangolins and anteaters both specialized in eating ants, so they developed some similar tools, like the long tongue.
Nature finding similar solutions independently. Wow. Okay, so we've established these animals are just incredibly unique and, frankly, amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a really dark side to their story, isn't there? This illegal trade. The threats they face are huge.
Absolutely huge. Pangolins hold this really terrible title. They're the most trafficked mammal on the entire planet.
The most traffic. That's staggering.
It is. Some estimates say they account for up to 20%, 1/5 of all illegal wildlife trade globally.
20%. Just for this one type of animal.
Yes. It's hard to get exact numbers, obviously, because it's illegal, but figures suggested that over 1 million pangolins were poached just in the decade before 2014.
1 million. What on earth is driving this? Why are people hunting them so relentlessly?
There are two main drivers, really. The first is their scales.
The keratin scales we talked about.
Exactly. They're highly valued in traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM, and also in traditional medicine practices in parts of Africa.
For what purpose? What do people believe they do?
Well, the beliefs cover a whole range of things, stimulating lactation in new mothers, draining pus from infections, treating skin diseases, even things like unblocking blood clots and promoting circulation.
Okay, but is there any scientific basis for this? Do the scales actually do any of that?
That's the crucial point. No, there is absolutely zero scientific evidence to support any of these purported health benefits. None.
Zero evidence, yet the demand is still huge.
Immense. These beliefs are deeply entrenched. It was even reported that as recently as 2015, pangolin scales were actually covered under some health insurance plans in Vietnam.
Covered by insurance, wow.
Yeah, and that kind of demand drives the black market price incredibly high. We're talking potentially over $3,000 per kilogram for scales.
$3,000 a kilo. I can see how that creates a massive, dangerous incentive for poaching.
Exactly. And then the second major driver is their meat.
People eat them.
Yes. In places like China, Vietnam, and other parts of Southeast Asia, pangolin meat is considered a luxury delicacy.
Luxury food, like caviar or something.
Kind of, yeah. It's a status symbol. And again, there are sometimes beliefs attached, like in China, it's sometimes thought to be good for kidney function. Restaurants, say in Vietnam, can charge huge amounts, maybe up to $150 per pound.
$150 a pound?
Yep. And the demand is so intense and the desire to prove authenticity is so high that sometimes the animals are actually killed right there at the restaurant table.
Oh, that's horrifying.
It's incredibly cruel. And weirdly, the very fact that it's illegal can sometimes make it seem more attractive in certain circles, you know, that forbidden fruit effect.
So it's scales for medicine, meat for luxury food. Anything else?
Unfortunately, yes. Their skins are sometimes used for leather goods, and in some really disturbing practices, their blood or even rice wine boiled with a baby pangolin is sought after for supposed medicinal property.
Good grief.
And then there's the trade in live animals, though, as we'll discuss, they do very poorly in captivity.
It just paints such a bleak, awful picture. And it's not just like big international crime syndicates involved.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's local people too.
That's a really important point. Surveys, like one done by Planet Indonesia, have shown that for many communities living near pangolin habitats, poaching is also driven by, well, basic needs, food and income.
So poverty plays a role.
Definitely. For generations in some areas, pangolins might have been a source of food or a way to make some money. It's a complex problem with these deep local roots, but also fueled by massive international demand and organized crime.
And on top of all this direct hunting, their homes are disappearing too, aren't they?
Absolutely. Habitat loss and degradation are huge threats running parallel to the poaching crisis.
What kind of habitat loss?
All sorts. Deforestation is a big one, clearing forests for agriculture, like rubber or palm oil plantations. That's been particularly bad for the Sunda pangolin in Southeast Asia.
Right, palm oil is a huge issue for lots of wildlife there.
It is. But also logging, mining operations, building big dams. They all destroy or fragment the forests and woodlands where pangolins live.
And even just building roads.
Even building roads, yeah. That leads to more pangolins getting hit by vehicles, sadly. But it also opens up previously remote areas, making it easier for hunters to get in.
So easier access for poachers.
Exactly. And then there are other specific threats, like in South Africa, where electrified fences put up for managing livestock or game reserves pose a real danger to the Cape pangolins. They get electrocuted.
Man, they're just getting hit from every possible angle.
It really feels like that sometimes.
And you mentioned earlier that as pangolins become rarer in Asia, the pressure is shifting to Africa.
Sadly, yes. That's exactly what we're seeing. As the 4 Asian species have been depleted by decades of poaching, the trafficking networks have increasingly turned their attention to the 4 African species to supply that ongoing demand, primarily in Asia.
So they're just shifting the source.
Right. There are reports suggesting dozens of new trafficking routes are opening up each year, moving pangolins or their parts out of Africa. It's putting immense pressure on those African populations now, too.
It's just such a desperate situation. It's honestly hard to hear about.
It is tough. It's a crisis.
But people are fighting back, right? There are conservation efforts happening.
Thankfully, yes. There's a growing global movement to try and save pangolins, but they're facing an uphill battle.
How bad is it officially, like in terms of endangerment level?
It's bad. All 8 species are listed on the IUCN Red List of threatened species. Their classifications range from vulnerable all the way up to critically endangered.
Critically endangered.
Yeah.
That's just one step away from extinct in the wild, isn't it?
It is. And the scary thing is, for all species, the population trend is decreasing. Numbers are dropping fast.
And which ones are in the most trouble?
Generally, the 4 Asian species, the Indian, Chinese, Philippine, and Sunda pangolins are considered to be at the highest risk right now. They've faced the intense poaching pressure for longer.
You mentioned the Sunda pangolin earlier.
Yeah, for the Sunda pangolin, estimates suggest its population might have crashed by something like 80% over just 21 years.
80%?
Yeah.
In 2 decades. That's terrifying.
It absolutely is.
So what about international laws? Are there rules against trading them?
Yes. The main international agreement is CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. Pangolins have had some level of CITES protection since way back in 1975.
Okay, so for a while.
But the really big step came in 2016. At the CITES conference that year, there was unanimous agreement to move all 8 pangolin species to Appendix 1.
Appendix Min, what does that mean, practically?
It's the highest level of protection CITES offers. Essentially, it means a complete ban on all international commercial trade in pangolins or their parts. No ifs, no buts.
A total ban. That sounds like exactly what was needed.
It was a landmark decision, definitely. A huge victory for pangolin conservation on paper.
But I sense a but coming.
Well, yes. The challenge, as always with these international bans, is enforcement.
Making it actually stick on the ground.
Exactly. Despite that Appendix I listing, a massive illegal black market continues to thrive. The demand, especially in China and Vietnam, is still so high, and the profits are so large that the trade persists.
So what are conservationists doing on the ground then, besides the international ban?
There's a lot happening. Things like supporting and equipping anti-poaching patrols in national parks and reserves, training law enforcement officers, customs officials, police to better recognize pangolin products and intercept illegal shipments.
Trying to stop it at the borders and domestically.
Right. Improving border controls is key. And then there's a huge push for public awareness, trying to reduce the demand in the first place.
Just letting people know these animals exist and are in trouble.
Precisely. And there are dedicated groups focusing specifically on pangolins now.
Like who?
Well, the IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, formed a specialist group just for pangolins back in 2012. The IUCN SSC Pangolin Specialist Group. Their job is to coordinate research and conservation efforts worldwide.
So, experts working together.
Yeah. And there's even a World Pangolin Day now.
Oh, really? When's that?
It seems to be the 3rd Saturday in February each year, though I've also seen February 15th mentioned. Either way, it's a day to try and get the word out.
And getting the word out is extra important for pangolins, maybe, because they're not as famous as some other endangered animals.
That's a really key challenge. They don't have the same charisma, you know? They're not big, dramatic animals like tigers or elephants or rhinos.
You don't see them on TV as much, maybe.
Exactly. They're shy, nocturnal, and honestly a bit weird looking to some people, even though we think they're amazing. This lack of public recognition makes it harder to generate widespread support and, crucially, funding for conservation.
And you don't really see them in zoos either, do you?
Very rarely. That's another big problem for awareness. They are incredibly difficult to keep healthy in captivity.
Why is that?
They have highly specialized diets, remember? Ants and termites, which are hard to replicate consistently. And they just seem to get very stressed in artificial environments. It leads to health problems and often shortened lifespans. I think back around 2015, San Diego Zoo was maybe the only zoo in the US that had one.
So if people can't see them easily, it's harder for them to care. Out of sight, out of mind.
Sadly, yes. That lack of visibility really hinders public understanding and the drive to protect them.
But it sounds like there's some hope in working directly with local communities. You mentioned that before.
Yes, that's becoming increasingly recognized as crucial. Community-led conservation initiatives show real promise.
Like the SWAT patrols you mentioned.
Exactly, like the Smart Patrol teams in places like Gunung Manning in Indonesia. When you empower local people, train them, employ them as rangers or monitors in their own forests,
They have a stake in protecting it.
right, it can lead to real reductions in illegal hunting and trapping, and also raises awareness within the community about why protecting these animals and their habitat is important, maybe even linking it to traditional knowledge or values.
That makes sense. But I imagine there are challenges there too.
Oh, definitely. You still have the economic pressures. If poaching pays more than conservation work, that's a tough reality. And sometimes you need to navigate complex issues around traditional resource use and customary law. It's not simple, but involving communities has to be part of the solution.
A multifaceted approach. And what about all the scales and things that do get confiscated? What happens to them?
Sometimes authorities undertake these large-scale destruction events.
Destroying them, like burning ivory.
Exactly the same idea. In 2017, for instance, Cameroon publicly burned about 3 tons of confiscated pangolin scales. The hope is that it sends a strong message that these products have no value, discourages trafficking, and prevents the items from somehow leaking back onto the black market.
Making very public statement.
hmm And on the demand side, there have been some potentially positive signals, too. There were reports, for example, that the Chinese government revised some regulations to no longer officially recognize the use of pangolin scales in traditional medicine formularies.
Oh, that could be significant if it reduces demand at the source.
Potentially, yes. Enforcement and shifting long-held beliefs are still hurdles, but it's a step.
And it helps when well-known people speak out too, I guess. Like David Attenborough.
Absolutely. Someone like Sir David Attenborough highlighting the plight of pangolins, calling the Sunda pangolin one of the species he'd most like to save, that brings invaluable global attention to them.
Yeah, his voice carries a lot of weight.
It really does. Though, the dangers are still very real. There was a really disturbing incident reported in 2022.
What happened?
Rebels in the Democratic Republic of Congo apparently captured a pangolin and were trying to hold it for ransom. It just highlights the dangerous and unpredictable situations these animals and the people trying to protect them can find themselves in.
Wow. Held for ransom. That just shows how desperate and bizarre the whole situation is.
It really underscores the urgency.
Okay, so as we start to wrap up this deep dive, let's try and summarize. What are the absolute key things we need to remember about pangolins?
Right. I think the main takeaways are pangolins are utterly unique mammals, the only ones with scales like this, and they play a real ecological role, particularly in controlling insect populations and aerating soil.
Unique and important. Got it.
Second, they are facing an extreme extinction crisis. This isn't an exaggeration. It's driven primarily by this massive illegal international trade.
Fueled by demand for their scales and meat.
Exactly. Scales used in traditional medicine despite having no scientifically proven benefits, and meat consumed as a luxury product. And layered on top of that is significant habitat loss.
And it's crucial to remember that point about the lack of scientific evidence for the medicinal uses, right?
Absolutely vital. It's based on belief, not biology.
So the problem is global, involving poaching, trafficking, demand, and habitat destruction.
Yes. And it requires a global response. Continued, strengthened conservation efforts are essential. That includes everything from anti-poaching patrols to international cooperation to tackling the demand.
And as you said, addressing the socioeconomic factors that might push local communities towards poaching and just generally making more people aware that these incredible creatures even exist and are in such dire straits.
Precisely. It's about law enforcement, but it's also about education, alternative livelihoods, and changing consumer behavior. This isn't just about saving one quirky animal. It reflects on our broader relationship with the natural world.
Which brings us to maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Here's something to ponder. What does it really say about us, about our priorities, when a creature as unique, as ancient, and as vulnerable as the pangolin is being driven towards extinction? For beliefs that have no basis in science, and for fleeting status symbols.
Yeah.
What responsibility do we all share to ensure these quiet, scaly animals don't just vanish forever? What can we do to make sure future generations even have the chance to know they existed?
That's a really important question for all of us to sit with, I think.
It definitely is. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that incredible and sometimes heartbreaking information with us.
Thanks for diving into it. It's an important story to tell.
Thank you for joining us on Nature's Narratives, Nook, for this deep dive into the world of pangolins. And hey, if you enjoyed learning about these fascinating endangered creatures, please do hit that subscribe button. We'd love to have you back for our next exploration.